Simmons was thrown out of practice by Sixers head coach Doc Rivers today. And he also will be suspended for tomorrow night's season opener in New Orleans for conduct detrimental to the team. So a lot to get to with this story. Adrian Wojnarowski is going to be joining us in about 5 minutes here on SportsCenter. But again, take a look. This means he is out definitely for tomorrow's game against the Pelicans. If things end there, then he should be returning for their home opener, which is against the Brooklyn Nets on Friday, an ESPN game. So we will see what happens. But Matt Barry, Sage Steele back with you here with our half-hour headlines. And it's so fascinating. Oh, Tim Legler's joining us now? Oh, good. Let's go to Tim because, hey, you know Philadelphia better than anybody. You live right there, and I know how closely you have followed this story with Ben Simmons. When you hear conduct detrimental, Doc Rivers throwing Ben Simmons out of practice today, you say what?
Well, first, Sage, I said the day after the Atlanta series ended that Ben Simmons can never play in a Philadelphia 76ers uniform again. Knowing that market, knowing the media, the fan base, the coaching staff, the way he was exposed and his fragile psyche was exposed during that series, I said it the very next day. And then you got into the summer, I expected something to happen. And when it didn't, and Ben Simmons made it very, very clear, in no uncertain terms, including telling the organization when he flew out to Los Angeles to meet with him that he did not want to play there. He wanted to move on. This, to me, right now, is no one's fault but the 76ers to find themselves in this situation that they allowed themselves to get into training camp and Ben Simmons to show up at any point. This deal had to have been made in the summer. And this is not a surprise to me because Ben Simmons didn't want to be there. And when you walk into a locker room, Sage, and the only reason you are there, and everyone knows it, is because of the money you are missing and how that was cold water in his face the first time he got fined $360,000 for missing a preseason game. He starts doing the math on that. This is going to escalate very quickly if I don't report, but it's the only reason I'm going to report. And in a team sport, if you have one guy that is not bought in and has a different agenda than everybody else in the building, particularly as you're getting your season off the ground and you're trying to get everybody pulling in the same direction, it's an untenable situation. So I am not surprised whatsoever that this has gotten to this point this quickly based on his body language and what we saw over the first couple days at practice when basically he showed up merely to avoid being fined anymore.
There's a lot to unpack here, Tim. You mentioned Ben Simmons' fragile psyche, something that a lot of people have talked about over the last several years. One thing I don't think we've talked about too much, though, is him maybe stepping out in practice, certainly not games, but in practice to get to the point where Doc Rivers has to make a decision like this with the season beginning in just a matter of hours. You say this is Philly's fault, though? So forget about the past. How about today? What should the Sixers do now that it's gotten to this point?
Oh, well, no, now you don't have a choice. I mean, yes, the Sixers are doing the right thing, but you're never in this situation if you move Ben Simmons over the course of the summer or certainly before training camp starts. But once he's in practice and he's completely disengaged, and we saw a little bit of video of him, there was a team huddle. He's back off to the side, dribbling a basketball, and as soon as they break, he bolts out of the gym. There's clips of him sliding around defensively, sort of half-heartedly with a cell phone in his pocket. I don't know what happened, yesterday or today or whenever this incident happened, and there will obviously be more information coming out on that. But if you're Doc Rivers, you can't have that in the gym. You cannot have that kind of negative energy in the gym, particularly from a guy that is one of your best players. It just can't be. Ben Simmons made it known to everyone, I do not want to play for that organization again. Now, listen, that doesn't necessarily mean a guy like that has to have all the leverage. The Sixers can go out and they can take their time and try to make the right deal. But I think all along they have overvalued his market value, and there were deals that could have been made that they didn't pull the trigger on the whole time, thinking they could talk him in to coming back into the fold or maybe waiting until situations in Portland and Washington took hold over the first couple of months. And maybe you get a disgruntled Damian Lillard. Maybe you get a disgruntled Bradley Beal that would make those players available to the Sixers. I think that's what Daryl Morey has been wanting to do this entire time. And this has backfired in an enormous way because now you have a guy that I don't think can be around the team for the foreseeable future.
Right.
Because Ben Simmons showed up for one reason, to stop the bleeding financially, and everybody there knows it. And when the guy is not bought in, you can't have that negative energy and that negative presence in your practice facility, in your locker room. You just can't have it. Not when you're trying to get your season off on the right foot. So now, to me, this is more of a buyer's market for for other teams around the league than it's ever been, because the Sixers have to move this guy. And now teams know it, so they're not going to put their best offer forward. They're going to try to get him for a little bit less than they would have given up in the summer.
They have completely lost all their leverage again, as their season is set to tip off in about 24 hours. So, Tim, if you're Doc Rivers and you have to somehow bring the rest of this team together and put that drama aside to begin the season at New Orleans, what do you say? What do you say to Joel Embiid and everybody else out there?
Well, first of all, Sage, I'm going to back up. If I were Doc Rivers, I am going in and meeting with Daryl Morey 24 hours, 48 hours after that last game and saying, listen, we have to do something here. We've got to move on from this. We've got to move on from this, because what Doc Rivers saw was a guy that at a key position, maybe the most important position in the NBA, a position that almost every team in the league has firepower at as a scorer, saw a guy refuse to take a field goal in 5 fourth quarters in a 7-game series. We saw obviously the infamous play when he didn't take the dunk over Trae Young and instead kicked it out to Matisse Thybulle. That to me was like the signature moment that Doc Rivers had to say to himself, and that's why he was so brutally honest 15 minutes after a loss. He went out there and he was shocked. I don't know how to answer that question about moving forward with Ben Simmons. You don't see coaches do that. The reason was because it was so shocking to Doc Rivers, what he had just witnessed. It was shocking to Joel Embiid. That's why he commented on it. So if I'm Doc Rivers, it never gets close to this point. Yeah. And that's the question you hit me with. If I were Doc Rivers, this would have been insisted upon over the course of the summer. Let's get back as much as we can now before we get closer to the season and people know we're now in a situation where we're eventually going to be forced to move him. Let's be proactive about it right now. But for the foreseeable future, I don't see Ben Simmons' attitude changing, and I don't see the Sixers really being allowed to have him around their team. It's just not the way you can start a season, and I think the Sixers have really put themselves in a very difficult position now by letting it go this deep.
Ben Simmons tried to force his way out of Philadelphia over the summer. It did not work, and now he is doing that at another level. Tim Legler, stay with us. You'll be back with us throughout the day on SportsCenter with this breaking news with Ben Simmons. So as we now begin our half-hour headlines, I mean, that's the thing, Matt, is you think about it came down to all this. You can't change what you didn't do in the past. But now what? Because there's expectations in Philly, and they got a game to play, a huge one tomorrow. I mean, this is a mess. Yeah, Adrian Wojnarowski standing by. He's the one that reported that he was kicked out of practice. Can't wait to peel this back with him, because this has been, you said, it's been brewing. The fact that we're on night one of the NBA and all of a sudden everybody's surprised that this happened, I can't wait to get to Woj about this, because there's so much going on in Philadelphia right now. As for Monday Night Football, what a finish it was. Buffalo, Tennessee, 22 seconds left, fourth and less than a yard from the 2.5 line. And instead of kicking the field goal, Sean McDermott, we loved it. He went for the quarterback sneak. It didn't work. Josh Allen stopped. Here's what was said afterwards.
Didn't work out in our favor, obviously. Didn't have the greatest footing.